Hello everyone, thanks for joining today's webinar on EPA, what makes a good portfolio. So this is going to be a really interesting webinar, we think. We've got myself here, Charlotte Bradshaw, Partner Engagement Manager, and we've also got Kat Cleaver. So Kat is our Assessment Development Manager.
Hi, good afternoon.
So Kat is our expert on EPA, assessment, anything to do with assessment, Kat's our lady. So
Excellent.
Kat will be able to run through this presentation and talk about the portfolio and hopefully give you some hot tips.
Excellent. Okay, so first of all, thank you very much everyone for joining us this afternoon. As Charlotte has said, my name is Kat Cleaver and I am the Assessment Development Manager for CMI. Part of my role is that I manage the team of independent assessors, so that will be obviously completing the endpoint assessment. Plus I also work with and support the EPA team in the development of the actual endpoint assessment and that. Before we start today, it's really important that we sort of just again highlight our mission and vision, because we really are out there we want to have that better led and managed organisations. We want to look at how we can increase that number and standard of our professionally qualified managers and leaders. And we really, believe that the leadership and management apprenticeships will enable us to do that and achieve our vision and our mission. We are an endpoint assessment organisation for 7 standards. So we have obviously the 4 management and leadership standards, ranging from the level 3 team lead, the level 5 operations manager, the level 6 chartered management to degree apprenticeship, and we've got the level 7, which is our senior leaders master's degree apprenticeship. But we also have 3 non-management and leadership standards. One of those is the level 3 business administrator. We also do the level 4 junior management consultant and the level 4 associate project manager. So we're quite a range there, and quite a number of questions and assessments that we have to sort of deal with. So really today I'm looking at what makes that good portfolio, and it's a question that we probably get asked at least every day, if not 2 to 3 times a day. And that. So obviously the portfolio is that collection of evidence to demonstrate an apprentice's skills and behaviours against the apprenticeship standard. And whilst it is in all of the current assessment plans, we do know that potentially moving forward, the portfolio may become a non-assessed element of the endpoint assessment, but it is a fabulous opportunity for the apprentice to be able to pull together into one document something that really highlights and showcases the journey they've been on, the learning they've gained, and how they're taking that learning and applying that into their skills and behaviours. So whilst it's not the favourite piece of work that for the apprentice or anyone, it is actually a really important part of the endpoint assessment. So what is the portfolio? Well, like I said, the portfolio will enable the apprentice to showcase their best work. We try to say, if you can, think about 15 to 20 pieces of evidence, which I know sounds all quite difficult when potentially you're looking at 70 to 80 different learning outcomes across some of the standards, but it is doable, I promise you. We normally say that the portfolio is presented electronically. We do have the ability to do non-electronic portfolios, but that has to be agreed in advance with our endpoint assessment team. We encourage those portfolios to have a breadth of evidence in there, and to really look at different forms or different methods for that evidence. So please include videos and audio and photographic evidence. However, we would ask that it is time-stamped. But what is brilliant about a video, an audio or a photographic evidence is it actually shows the apprentice doing completing the activity. All of the evidence within the portfolio, though, must be clearly referenced to the learning outcomes within the standard, because otherwise it makes it incredibly difficult for my team of assessors to be able to mark and check to make sure that what they're looking for. The final thing that we want there is that we want them to be able to use this portfolio as an opportunity for the apprentice to reflect on their learning and demonstrate how they've applied the acquired knowledge within their workplace, because it is that opportunity for them to potentially press the pause button, I like to say, and then think about, okay, so what have I got here? Why am I showing it? But more importantly, what's that telling somebody about me?
So Kat, on that, we've actually just had a question come through. So any questions can be asked in the form at the bottom in the description. So somebody's asked, does the portfolio have to evidence all knowledge, skills and behaviours in the standard? And how can this be possible with just 15 to 20 pieces of evidence?
Okay, yeah, it is. So yes, we do. All of the knowledge, skills and behaviours have to be evidenced as part of the portfolio, Charlotte. And it's really important that if they don't, then it would automatically mean that we would have to potentially fail an apprentice or refer an apprentice, because it is stipulated within all of the standards that it has to cover the totality of the standard. One of the things you can do is and we'll talk about it a bit more in a little while, is about the fact of using qualitative evidence rather than quantitative evidence. So it's about thinking about a piece of evidence and then thinking, well, it's not just one piece of evidence per learning outcome. So for instance, one of the things I've always said, and I actually was talking to somebody earlier this morning, and said, when I think about communication, I almost wouldn't want to see that as a separate piece of evidence, because actually every piece of evidence that the apprentice is providing should in some ways be showing a form of communication. So you will find that you'll be able to map multiple learning outcomes or multiple areas, and we encourage that rather than just do one piece of evidence per learning outcome.
Okay, that's great.
Excellent. So one of the things we think about when we're looking at how to create that evidence, or how to choose evidence, is to think about looking at that collect, select, connect and reflect. And again, it's about sort of thinking about these different points where you can start to be pausing and thinking and that. So collect. One of the things, the apprentice should collect evidence for their portfolio as they go. It will certainly make their life easier. Collect everything, because you'll guarantee, like it says there, if you don't have it, it will be the one piece of evidence you'll need. Even if you're not uploading it into the apprentice isn't uploading it into their e-portfolio system, encourage them to potentially keep like a folder on their laptop or on their computer at work, where anything and everything they think might be in some way useful, or if they get an email where somebody said that was a brilliant job done and things like that, just start collecting everything, almost like using it as like a dumping bucket, and then they can start going through that and then start filtering or sifting through it to think about, well, actually, where, first of all, is it qualitative, and then start thinking about, well, can it map to multiple different things, or how can I use this? But like I said, it's better to have too much and then try and filter stuff away than get to the end of their apprenticeship and realise that they've then got to go back over, if it's obviously the CMDA programme, 3 to 4 years of trying to gather evidence. Probably not such more, so difficult if they're doing, say, the level 3, where they're only doing like 12 to 18 months and they've got to track back on. So it is really important. Like we said there, consider those different forms of evidence, and I spoke about that on the slide before, but also look at professional discussions, think about observations and peer observations. Try and get to, most people nowadays have a phone, a tablet or a webcam. If you're in a meeting, encourage them to potentially record a meeting or something, but obviously make sure that they get permission from the people within the room. It may be that they just want to do a reflection on something, and they can just use their tablet or their phone to talk into their phone and do a reflection on that. One of my colleagues uses a really good example for reflections, where it's not a leadership and management one, but it was actually a motor vehicle one, and said that there was an apprentice that she worked with who actually went round and was like doing almost like an MOT check on a car, and was using their phone and was taping it and was giving estimates. That one video, that one reflection, that one piece of work where they were just using the phone rather because they couldn't be bothered to write it, ended up being a really strong piece of evidence. So it's about looking at things very differently sometimes. As long as it shows that the apprentice is learning, growing and changing, then it is good evidence. but it's about then showcasing the best bits. Select. So this is when we've got our big dumping bucket of everything, it's about then selecting those pieces. And again, selecting as they go, starting to signpost and timestamp, because the last thing they want to do is at the end of their apprenticeship is having to go back through all of their evidence and then thinking, now I put that in there okay, yeah, because I wanted to show communication. Now, whereabouts on that 4-minute video is it? So just jot something down, keep like a little bit of a notebook or something with how they want to do it. Again, it will make their life easier, and obviously also the training provider's life easier. They have to have evidence that covers all of the learning outcomes of the standard, and we do want them to showcase their best work. But what we want them to do is make sure that when they do select something, it does show what they did, why they did it, what difference it has made. But more importantly, as they then start to move towards the end of their apprenticeship, how they've changed and grown, because it is very much about that whole journey. And so it was shown that potentially there may be something as a piece of evidence where they'll put a couple of like backing documents to it, and one of the documents was something they did at the beginning of their apprenticeship, and one of the documents that they're linking it to was towards the back, at the end of their apprenticeship, and it can really show how they changed as they gained in not only confidence and their learning, but also their experience. Connect. So the apprentice should connect their evidence, and then getting ready for that endpoint assessment gateway. So one of the things we're looking at here is, does the evidence that they've collected showcase their best work? And I love the word showcase, because that's really what the endpoint assessment is about. It gives them an opportunity to showcase the journey they've been on and showcase that learning they've gained and how it's impacted them.
I know you do sometimes refer it as endpoint achievement cap for that reason.
Yeah, and it is. Assessment always feels like it's a bit of a test, and it is a test, but it is an endpoint achievement, because we want them to be able to really showcase and tell us and my team of assessors just what it is that they've done as part of their apprenticeship. Because most of most of the apprentices, when they come through, they've done the work, they've done, that some of the examples we see are really, really good, and it's about them being able to be really proud of what they've done. And that this is a really good one, and I actually posted this one to somebody earlier this morning, and it was quite a challenge. They said, I said to them, would a colleague who's not on the apprenticeship program be able to see what your apprentices have learned, what they've done, and how they're developed over the course of the apprenticeship program? And that's a really good test, that if you gave your apprentices, or the apprentice gave a colleague their portfolio before Gateway, and said, here you go, and that person would be able to know and clearly see what it is they're trying to evidence, would they be able to do so? And I think that's a really good testing point. The final one is really, it makes my team's job easier. Is all of the evidence mapped and easy to find? Can they pinpoint it instantly? Because ultimately, for my team of assessors, it really is about being able to look at everything, and they do look at everything, I can assure you, but more importantly, can they find it easily? Because there's nothing worse than then having to trawl through multiple things to try and find something, whereas if it's all there, or it's all laid out for them, it makes their job easier, and they can actually spend more time really sort of focusing on, trying to draw out the breadth and the depth that we're looking for. And that is the difference between a pass and a distinction, really. Finally, reflect. The apprentice should reflect, getting ready for the successful live assessment. And this is a really good piece that they can be starting to do, not only before Gateway, but certainly between Gateway and their live assessment. Because what we want them to do is to prepare. Can they explain with confidence what they've learned, how they've used it, how they've changed, what they did, why they did it, and what the outcome was? What is it that they're going to do in order to prepare for their competency-based interview, or professional discussion or presentation, depending on what that live assessment looks like? It is really obvious for the assessment team to look at an apprentice and know whether they're prepared for their live assessment. And it makes a big difference when they come prepared, they've thought about examples they can use, they've practiced their presentation if they're doing, say, the level 5, level 6 or level 7, that type of thing. Like it says there, if they're doing, they should practice being interviewed and being interviewed about the evidence, and use a friend, a colleague, a fellow apprentice, and just make sure that they've got some good examples that they can sort of highlight against each of the learning outcomes. So that's really where we were talking about what they need to do up to then. Is there any questions come through that I need to pick up on, or are we?
So there is a few questions. So how do we actually share the learner's portfolio with the assessor?
Yeah, so that's actually done through our Skillshare portal, and they have the option of either uploading it as a file or allowing us to have access to the portfolio system. And one of the things that we do when we're working with training providers in that period leading up to Gateway is to spend some time working with you to work out what's the best way for you to upload, and the EPA team will probably work with them as part of that pre-Gateway period.
Perfect. Does the presentation element of EPA have to meet all of the standards?
No, the presentation element for the level 5, level 6 and level 7 is around their project, and if you look in the assessment plan, it does say and state what the presentation will be about. If I remember rightly off the top of my head, and you're testing me here, it's around what they set out to achieve, how they went about doing it, what the outcomes were, and if there's like recommendations. So it is laid out within the assessment plan, but it doesn't relate to specific learning outcomes as such or to the whole of the standard. It is around that, what did they do as part of their work-based project.
Perfect. Would it be a good idea to ask the learner to complete the PTLS again to show change and or SWOT?
Yes, if that's when you say like PTLS as in like their skill scan type thing, yes, actually it's a really good thing. And I was talking to actually a partner yesterday, and we were talking about trying to do obviously some sort of a baseline assessment at the beginning, then picking it up potentially halfway through their program, depending obviously on how long the program is. And certainly at the end, and getting them to think about, well, first of all, how have I changed? What has my learning been? What can I take forward from that? So yeah, I would always encourage them to do reflection at different points or redo their skill scan at different points through their program.
Perfect. And one last one at this point. Would a recorded summative interview be beneficial as additional evidence of learning?
Yes. Yeah, obviously anything like that works and it's brilliant, but and if there's a way that you can use it like a professional discussion and hit multiple learning outcomes, sometimes those can be quite useful if there's a piece in a portfolio where it's potentially not as strong as they were hoping, that you can almost use something like that to sort of strengthen it.
Brilliant.
Okay, so we're now going to look at each of the different elements within the portfolio for each of the different leadership and management apprenticeships. So the portfolio for the level 3 team leader, level 5 operational manager, or level 6 CMDA. So it is assessed separately at endpoint assessment, and my IA and the IAAs will be looking for that application of the knowledge within the workplace and be looking at those skills and behaviours. So whilst obviously the knowledge has to be evidenced, we are also looking at how that knowledge is being applied. So again, when thinking about trying to map multiple learning outcomes to a piece of evidence, you might be able to show one piece of evidence which is showing like the knowledge is implied or inferred because it's being applied really well. It could be also that one piece of evidence is showing, well, because I've got this knowledge, I'm now able to do this, and then that's how this is going to impact me. So it's about thinking about how you can merge things together. It does also provide that basis of the topics for the competency-based interview for level 3 and level 5, and the professional discussion for the CMDA. So it is about understanding that we do use the portfolio as our basis for then deciding which areas we are going to explore further at interview or as part of the professional discussion. And that's quite key, because it's not that we're trying to just plug gaps. It's brilliant. It does give us that opportunity that if a piece of evidence is there, but we don't feel it's quite met the standard that we would be looking for, we are able to use the interview and the professional discussion to potentially what we call plug gaps. However, the assessors really also like to do is, if there's a piece of evidence where it has met the standard, but we feel that it's got that opportunity to be extracted further or to be taken further and be moved more into that distinction level, then again, that gives us that opportunity to explore further at interview or professional discussion. For the level 3 and level 5, there is a requirement for a CPD, and so that will need to be included within that portfolio, almost as it wouldn't be included as part of the 15 to 20 pieces of evidence, but it does need to be included within that portfolio, and is actually a separate assessment element for the live assessment day, where there'll be an actual activity or an assessment element where we will focus just on the CPD.
Is there a guide cut of how many examples of CPD they should take with them?
Because everyone will have different ones. It does have to be, though, from the lifetime of the apprenticeship. So that is sometimes where, if, say, somebody has done a training course prior to their apprenticeship, but it's actually quite a key training course, unfortunately, we couldn't take that training activity or that learning activity or that CPD activity. But what we could do is they could use almost that as if they have to do some form of refresher, or if they have to do like an annual mandated sort of top up for it or something. Or it could be that they might need to do some form of their own refreshment of it. So it could be, well, I did this training course 2 years ago, and actually I'm going to set as part of my CPD that I'm just going to refresh myself on it, so I know exactly what I can remind myself what it is I need to do. So it does have to be within the lifetime. No, it can be, and we want to see a variety. So similar to like the portfolio, we want that variety. We want formal and informal. We want personal and professional, because obviously it is about showing that a personal development opportunity may also help them professionally as well.
Perfect.
The portfolio for the Senior Leaders Master's Degree Apprenticeship is slightly different. So this was one of our newer apprenticeship standards. And so this was actually approved and became Crown copyright after the decision had been made that no longer would a portfolio be considered to be a separate assessment element. And partly what it is it still forms like that basis or that benchmark for whatever then happens as part of the rest of the endpoint assessment. So it isn't marked, it is reviewed. So we have to still look at it. We still have to look at all the evidence. We have to then make sure that there's evidence there against all of the learning outcomes, because that's a stipulation of the assessment plan. And it could mean that if it was audited, that it could obviously impact the training provider for not making sure that happened. But it's not marked, but we do review that evidence and we use it then as that basis. And as part of that review, we look at how that the apprentices applied the knowledge they gained as part of their master's programme within their workplace, and also how they are now demonstrating, again, those skills and behaviours. And it is that benchmark or that basis for us to be able to then work out how we're going to structure the professional discussion. And again, it gives us that opportunity to sort of discuss some areas in more depth, to try and see if there's additional examples, that type of thing. So what does good look like? I think after the sort of like, well, this seems to be like one of the questions we get asked so many times each day. And I've already touched on it really. Think about quality rather than quantity. It is better to include one piece of evidence that covers 5 learning outcomes than 5 pieces of evidence that only cover 1 learning outcome. So the example that's got there is when collating evidence, say for a project management learning outcome, there may be elements in there that relate to finance. There will be elements in there that relate to communication, because in some way it's either a written communication, a verbal communication, or a digital communication. there's chances there's going to be something in there around leading people, around developing those collaborative relationships, around managing time, around decision making. And actually a really good project can cover sort of about 80%, if not more like 90% of most of the learning outcomes in the standard, if it's done, you know, really well. So it is about thinking about that. One of the examples I always use here is a project plan. And dependent on obviously the level of that the project plan looks into, or the depth that the project plan looks into, but it can have in there things like assumptions, it can have in things in there about projected budgets, it can have how it links to strategic goals, it can have in there stakeholders, so who the stakeholders are. So that one piece of evidence can cover quite a number of different areas. Further examples of good evidence, witness testimonies. This is brilliant. So again, it was only about 2 hours ago I was having this same conversation. It's about understanding that when we have a piece of evidence and it's a really good, say, reflective statement, or it's a really good piece of work-based evidence, but it doesn't have then links to either, if it mentions or it refers to a policy, it doesn't have a link or a snapshot of the policy. It just then, you know, and that. But more importantly, if we've got then a witness testimony, and the example was somebody said, I've been to a meeting, and it's what we try and do as part of our apprentices, that if they do these meetings with clients, they get the client to write a witness testimony to say, you know, some sort of a feedback on it. And they said, is that good? I went, yeah. And so when obviously the apprentice is talking about meetings or trying to evidence this meeting, they've then got obviously what they did, they'll have like copies of their minutes and stuff like that, and then they've got this feedback from somebody that was actually as part of that meeting. Fabulous opportunity, you know, and sadly missed quite often. Observation reports of real work situations. So again, if the line manager or mentors or even the training providers are able to go in and observe, it gives us that opportunity to see it really happening. Self-reflection statements are brilliant. However, I would say that they do need to be backed up, because a self-reflection statement is a really good way of thinking about, okay, how am I applying that knowledge into my skills and behaviours? But it does need to be backed up with actual examples of what's actually happening. And like I put there, is backed up by examples of or links to work products such as agendas and meetings, presentations, project reports, annual appraisals, personal development plans, organisational policies, or standard operating procedures. And that is it, I think, from me, unless there's a few questions coming through.
Good timing, Kat. So there has been quite a few questions, which is really good. We have got time for a few more that I'll read out. If you want to ask any more, please go ahead and we'll stay online for a little bit longer. So firstly, can we use the 20% off the job tracker as CPD documentation?
Yes, I would say you probably can. And in fact, actually, again, that relates to some of the conversation I was having with a partner yesterday, in that they were actually going to do some sort of like a bit of an assessment, self-assessment, and that. And then they were sort of saying, well, actually, if I get them to do as part of this assessment, they identify where they potentially have got gaps. And whilst obviously we're delivering on programme activities, getting them to think about, well, what could they do other than the on-programme activities in order to address some of those gaps in the knowledge or in their skills. And we would, and as I was talking to the, you know, this partner and that, we were saying, actually, what you're doing there is you're actually getting them to identify their 20% off the job opportunities, and it makes it a better way of trying to sell 20% off the job. So it was actually a very simple way of sort of using it as being able to then sort of say, well, actually, here you go, this is what I've identified, so I'm going to put this into my CPD log, and then I can use it. But it also, like I said, it does mean that it's a better sell for the 20% off the job.
Okay. How would, what would a portfolio look like that would be a fail apart from not meeting the standards?
Okay, so certainly for level 3 and level 5, there is a requirement that they have to reach at least 50% of the allocated marks for each assessment element. And obviously the portfolio is one of those assessment elements. So what that may mean is if we've got a number of areas within the portfolio where there is evidence there, but it's not met what we would expect of that demonstration at that level 3 or that level 5, then if that was like multiple areas, that could cause that potentially that fail. So again, if we've got a lot of narrative self-reflection statements but not backed up by work evidence, again, all we've got there is the word of the apprentice without actually seeing real evidence. So it's quite a complex thing, but one of the things that the assessment team do is they do look at all of the different learning outcomes, all of the evidence, and they think of it in that lines of, well, have I got evidence? That's the first question. And then how strong is it? And it's like, well, is it, I've got evidence, but it's quite weak. However, that may be then something I can pick up later on. Or is it evidence that I've got that just about meets what I would expect of that level of that, it's hitting the learning outcome, but it's quite sparse. So again, we talk about breadth and depth. So again, if we've got complex problems, or if we've got breadth as in the variety of different types of evidence, or different pieces of work or links or activities assigned to each learning outcome, that gives us that breadth and depth that we're looking for.
Brilliant. How many hours of CPD is required for CPD?
There is no hour limit. As I said, it is purely around them using their, recording everything into their log. Just for everyone that's on the call's benefit, I'll give you a bit of an insider piece here. Is the assessors will choose 3 activities at random. And again, remembering we're thinking formal, informal, personal, professional, that type of thing. And they will look at different things, something that's, let's say, involving a knowledge, something that's potentially involving a skill or a behaviour. So, and they choose just 3 activities at random from a CPD log or a CPD activity log. And they will then discuss in more detail and more depth those 3 activities, but it is purely at random.
So is it possible, Kat, for a learner to select their best CPD activities?
Yeah, it could be that that's what they want to do, because it may be that they find they don't need to put everything in, because for some learners, especially if they're really good at recording, I suppose it comes down to how good is the apprentice at recording their CPD, because I'm brilliant at, when I first start, I think, yeah, I can do this. And one of the things I do, just for my own personal thing, is anything I think I can use that's CPD, I colour it a bright green colour in my calendar. So first of all, it means I can track it. Like, I don't have to be thinking each week, oh, I need to record my CPD. But more importantly, then I can go back and then look over it and then think about, well, actually, yes, it was CPD I did, but actually, do I think I need it to go into my CPD log that I have to keep in order to keep my professional membership, that type of thing. So it is about sort of sometimes, again, doing that collect, select, connect and reflect type piece. And again, all their CPD activity is thinking about that reflection.
Perfect. If an apprentice has stuff they want to use as evidence in their portfolio, but it's made up of multiple parts, like a reflective account, a copy of a policy, work examples, does that count as one piece of evidence or multiple pieces of evidence?
One piece of evidence.
Okay.
One piece of evidence. So in effect, their reflective account is probably is what we would probably last as their primary piece of evidence, and then they'll have then those additional pieces as like their backup pieces of evidence. So you'll probably find that they'll reference their primary piece, but then have links or attachments to the backup pieces.
And the last question, which I think everyone will want to know the answer to, is do we have an exemplar portfolio that we can share?
No. And I get asked this all the time, and I know it's not what people want to hear. However, for me, and again for CMI, but and that, so the difference between, I would say, apprenticeships now to where they were in the past is that it really is around the apprentice, their journey, what they've done, and how it relates to them, their role, their team, their organisation. And so one of the things we don't want is that hundreds and hundreds of mini-me portfolios. and that. And it is about just trying to make it so that it is that showcase. It does give us that, reflection piece and the impact piece, but actually there is no actual set structure, because every single apprentice is different.
So individual.
And it is about the individual. And earlier on, we were just talking prior to this meeting about the fact that whilst obviously a lot of the apprenticeship is around the role of the employer, the training provider, and the endpoint assessment organisation, the most important person, all of that, is the person that's at the centre of that, and that is the apprentice.
Yeah.
And every single apprentice is an individual, so that's why we don't.
Perfect. And we've had just one last one in the nick of time. Would you suggest for the project the learner collects evidence for each skill, knowledge and behaviour?
No, because the project's not a project's not about that. The project is actually around, if they're doing an actual project, is about sort of doing a project, and it has to be a work-based project. This is level 5, level 6 and level 7, although I do know that quite a number of training providers are using projects now at level 3, because they find it is such a good basis to then be able to find evidence, and real good quality of evidence. But it is about using a work-based activity or a real-life issue within the organisation. So again, we wouldn't normally suggest that a project was set by a training provider. We would always recommend that the apprentice works with their employer to identify an area for a project. And it's then about thinking about just the natural work elements and the pieces of the day-to-day stuff. I hate to use the word stuff, but it is stuff, the day-to-day stuff that just actually happens when you are managing or leading or supporting a project, will naturally then start to generate evidence, such as a project plan, such as potentially a Gantt chart, such as meetings, minutes of meetings, action plans, contingency plans, all of these sorts of things that just naturally fall out of when you're working on that activity, that can all be really good, strong pieces of evidence. And then thinking about how that then can be backtracked through. And what is interesting is when we talk about the project for level 5, 6 and 7, and I know we're digressing slightly now, is that actually when we're looking at that, is we actually assess the project report, but the actual evidence and the stuff that they do as part of their project and the work-based activities that happen as they go through their project are then the things that we would almost expect to see within the portfolio, potentially referenced within the report, but more importantly, it gives them the opportunity to use that as part of their portfolio and their report to highlight everything.
Brilliant.
Thank you.
Okay, so if you do have any more questions, please feel free to contact us at epa@managers.org.uk. We are currently compiling our next lot of webinars, so we'll definitely send everyone a registration form for any more that you might be interested in. I have also attached a feedback form to the YouTube description if you just click on show more. If you could please take a couple of minutes to just fill that out, that would be really appreciated. And a big thank you to Kat for taking the time and providing us all with some hot tips. And
excellent. Yeah. And obviously, if anyone is interested, we do run our Start with the End in Mind activities. So we tend to split them in that we do a level 3, level 5, and then we do a level 6, level 7. Our next one on the 20th of March is primarily based around our level 6, level 7. But we have got dates coming up in the calendar. I think it's 2nd of April or something like that.
April. So
early April for the next level 3, level 5. So again, if people are interested, one of the things about those is it not only gives you the opportunity to gain information, but it gives training providers the opportunity to meet other training providers, but also to meet the experts in the room. So people like myself and the EPA team and the engagement managers are there in the room to help and answer questions.
Perfect. Thank you everyone. I enjoy your afternoon and hope to see you on the next